Hello, my name is Annick Joseph, Society of Professional Journalists North Carolina Chapter President. Welcome to our webinar titled The Art of Storytelling. Our first guest is Emmy, Regional Edward R. Murrow and Associated Press winning veteran journalist Jeff Butera, who is the author of Write Like You Talk, a guide to broadcast news writing, used in curriculums at several colleges and universities across the country. Butera spent the first half of his career reporting at stations around the country, including Phoenix and Tampa Bay. He then transitioned to the anchor desk, serving as the primary news anchor at the ABC affiliate in Fort Myers for more than a decade. He returned to Tampa Bay in January of 2023 to anchor with Spectrum Bay News 9, where he currently serves as the midday news anchor. Our second guest is Emmy, SPJ, Associated Press, and Louisiana Association of Broadcasters winning veteran journalist Natasha Williams, who was awarded an honorary doctorate from Wilberforce University. Williams spent the bulk of her career as an anchor and investigative reporter for WHIO-TV in Dayton, Ohio. Williams has worked in Tennessee, Illinois, Louisiana, and most recently at WLKY-TV in Louisville, Kentucky. Williams is now a national news anchor for iHeartMedia's Black Information Network. Let's welcome Jeff Butera and Natasha Williams. So we're going to start off with what makes a good story. So did you want to go ahead and start, Jeff?
I think what makes a good story is either something that we believe is relevant to our viewers' lives, or at least a majority of our viewers' lives, or at the very least is something that's going to pique their interest and give them a, that's interesting thought after they see it. Either it's something that directly impacts them or at the very least can intrigue them. I think those are the best stories.
Okay, and you, Natasha, what makes a good story?
I think characters, the people. I hate that I'm choking up.
Take your time.
Oftentimes what people talk about in stories that I've done, they talk about the people. Those people that they remember, that man on the corner, that woman that, you talked to at that corner store, or I remember that grandmother that you were talking to about her grandson. They remember those characters, and sometimes they're just regular people. And so in so many of my stories over the years, I can remember, it might have been 20 years ago. I can tell you about a mother that I talked to that lost a son, or I can tell you about a grandfather who was a farmer, who had been a farmer for 20 years and he lost his farm. So it's oftentimes those people that make the stories.
Okay, and that kind of segues into a lot of newsrooms right now are doing more character-driven stories. So can you explain what that is, Jeff, and why it's important to do that? Why do you think newsrooms are kind of going in that direction?
Well, I can tell you that my newsroom in particular has embraced character-driven stories immensely. It's pretty much all that we're doing right now. We call them CDS stories, and that's the goal each day, is to tell those kinds of stories. And the basic idea, and I thought Natasha explained it really well, is people don't relate to stories unless there are people they can relate to that are in those stories. And really, news is about its effect on people. It's really the reason that people watch the news to begin with, is they want to know what's happening in their community, what's happening in their country, what's happening in their world, but specifically how it impacts them or how it impacts the people around them. And that's why it's so important to have the relevant people in your story and tell the story around them and how it's impacting them. And at our station, we talk about character-driven stories all the time, and who's going to be the main character in this story? Why are they the main character in this story? Should they be the main character in this story, or do we need to keep looking for the right person who really exemplifies what it is we're talking about in this story? And it's for the reason that Natasha outlined. People can find empathy very easily if you give them someone to care about. they're going to care less if it's just an idea or a thought. But if you can tell me and show me the person who's really impacted by what it is you're talking about, I get it. Because that could be my mom, that could be my dad, that could be my brother or sister or friend, and now I care.
Right. So, Natasha, you do radio. Um, how could you do more of character driven with just sound?
Oh, it's the same thing. I mean, I do a lot of mentoring, and I have one of my mentees. I talked to her the other day, and she'll tell you right now. The thing I tell them is, you have to have I hate to say it, I have a Mary Jones. You have to have a Mary Jones in your story. You know, you have to have a Mary Jones, that main character. So even in radio, I have to have that central figure. So if, a story I did today, someone stole a Christmas tree off the top of the car. Well, Mary Jones actually was, Oscar Jones. So Oscar Jones told me about how someone stole the Christmas tree off the top of their car. They went to get a Christmas tree for their home, and Oscar Jones told me about how he was devastated because, he's got a 7-year-old at his house who, had expected them to come home with their Christmas tree. They spent $100. They can't afford to get another one, and someone stole it. So now Oscar Jones has to go home and say, look, they stole our Christmas tree. We're going to have to wait another week or so before we get another one. So you have to have that main character, and Oscar Jones is the main character. The same thing. I mean, radio's no different. Sound is everything. So Oscar Jones is my main sound, and Oscar Jones is my Mary Jones. Sound tells a story, and it's no different in radio.
Now, speaking of sound, I've seen in a lot of these groups that I'm a part of where some stations, and we're not going to criticize how stations, do their thing, but some stations have taught some journalists to get rid of the sound and just have the picture. How important is sound to tell a story? And can sound be used to drive that story and maybe evoke emotion or feeling to kind of be, as the viewer, maybe more attached to the story, so to speak?
You're talking about sound bites?
Natural sound.
Oh, I think natural sound and sound bites are both extraordinarily important for different reasons. Natural sound can be something that can help the viewer feel like they are there, or at least get a sense of what it would have been like to be there. It can also be something that can break up tracks, and just for the pacing of your story can provide just a variety of sound, which just based on human instinct can help the ability to hold people's attention. If they get used to the repetition of the same particular kind of sound, whether it's your track or an interview, they will kind of lull themselves into sleep a little bit. And that sound break can wake them up from that. And there's great value in that too. And then sound bites are incredibly important because they provide the emotion and the opinion that you, as the objective journalist, are not supposed to be providing. It's supposed to come through the people who you're interviewing. I always teach people that for sound bites, I don't really want to hear facts in sound bites. I'm the fact person. I'm going to handle the facts of the story. I'm supposed to be trained on how to write those facts the best way possible. I would rather hear emotion and opinion in my sound bites from the people that I talk to, because that's the time to convey that.
And for you, Natasha?
I tell my my mentees, I don't want them to be fact stringers. So let's get away from stringing facts. So basically, these stories that they tell, I want, them to talk to people, and I want them to be storytellers. That's what we are, and I want you to be a masterful storyteller. So tell me a story. I want you to find Mary Jones, and I want you to get Mary Jones to tell me a story. And I don't want you to get in the way. You let Mary Jones tell me this story, and I want you to insert yourself as little as possible. But on the other hand, we're talking about nat sound. I interviewed a police officer one time, and he wasn't allowed to talk to me. So we basically put a mic on him. And the story was just about him coming to a park playing basketball with the kids. And my whole idea was that, a lot of police officers, it was a kind of during the time, not too long after George Floyd. And, all police officers aren't bad. That was the whole premise, that they're not bad guys. And so the whole idea was, this guy comes and plays basketball with these kids all the time. He just stops by the park and he's saying hi, and they know him. And so we just put a mic on him and we just let him play basketball. And so we did the whole story with him just playing basketball. It was just him talking. And he's like, oh, I got this one. I got this one. He said, are the banks open? And so he shot a shot, and she's like, oh, that's not going in. And so we did the entire story just with him talking and the kids talking, with him talking and the kids talking. And we just put the story together just using that. So there are lots of ways to skin the cat, as you go to say. So you don't have to always have, every aspect of that. And they have to be soundbite track. You can use Nat sound. You can use sound bites. You can use Nat sound. You can tell a whole story using all Nat sound. I mean, some of the best photographers go out by themselves and they can do a whole story basically by themselves without us ever being there. So, there are lots of ways you can tell stories, but all of it usually involves some Nat sound, some good track. I mean, some Nat sound and sound bites. You don't have to, there are lots of ways that you can mix it up basically, but it usually involves sound and Nat sound.
If I can add something, I love what Natasha just said. I always preach that formula is the enemy of creativity. And I don't think track shot is going to be your best format for almost any story. I think you have to take each story individually and decide, if I've got these elements, what is the best way to tell this story? On some stories, that may mean you saying almost nothing or virtually nothing at all in your track, because the sound bites are so perfect that you don't need them. At other times, you may come across and realize, wait, a sound is not going to drive this story. I've got to go with something else. I'm going to have to do the work and the heavy lifting with my track. Or maybe in Natasha's case, the Nat sound is perfect. The Nat sound takes you there and it tells you all you need to know. And you can just fill in the blanks with a little bit of track in between, putting people right on that basketball court to feel what's happening there. And it just depends on each individual story, but avoid that belief that I have to tell a story this way because that's the way it's done in this business.
It's so awesome because you guys keep gateway into like the next question I have, which it's about formatting. So you have, of course, telling stories can be very objective, right? How you put it together. Some say never start with a soundbite. Some say you can start with a soundbite. Some say if you do, it should be something just incredible, like an incredible soundbite. So speaking, talking about that, what can you talk about formatting? How you put a story together, what a journalist should think of, especially a journalist who's just starting out. Because I'm sure you guys remember, I remember when I first started, you get a lot of opinions. And sometimes they're all over the place that you get kind of confused or unsure of what am I supposed to do? So can you talk about that?
I can tell you this, and that's like, I started, one of the jobs, I went back to a smaller market, in one of my evening anchor jobs. And that was a common question. It's for some young journalists, it's a cop out. It's an easy way to start the package. You don't know you don't know how to start. You can't think of a lead sentence. So you're like, you got this lady, so you can just pop her in there. And that kind of gives you your little easy bridge in. That's not the way to go. I don't, so I would always say, unless she's screaming at the top of her lungs and it catches my attention, and it's like, it's going to grab the viewer, then I don't want to hear it. That's what I would say. That's the way I taught them, because it was just a cop out. But there are certain situations, like if they say something that is really going to grab you. Yes, let's start with that. But there's certain situations where there is compelling sound that doesn't have to be someone screaming at the top of their lungs. If they're saying something that's really impactful, if they're saying something that really, catches you or grabs you. There are certain situations that you do start with that sound, but generally my school of thought has always been when I'm trying to, in that teacher mode or in that mode of trying to help someone learn, how to start, it's always been, it needs to be something that's so strong, because I feel like, as you're starting your package, it needs to be something that's strong. It needs to be something that catches you. And if it's not, then, why are you starting with it? Why do you start with something that's just like, you're not catching anybody?
And for you, Jeff?
I think that there are no rules. I never want to feel like there's anything constraining my storytelling. It's whatever I think I can do that makes the best story possible. And everything that I'm going to do has to be motivated around, is this the best way to tell this story? Because I do think Natasha brings up a good point that just starting with Assad to get out of having to figure out an interesting way to hook the viewer is definitely a cop out. I also think she's incredibly correct with the idea that you have to start strong, because the viewer's attention span is minute. They have so many distractions around them, whether it's the phone that's in their lap, or if it's radio, things that are happening inside of the car. If it's television, maybe they're cooking dinner at the time or doing something else. You have to grab their attention and say, no, this story is worth stopping whatever else that you're doing so you can watch it or listen to it, because I've got something to tell you that has great value. I also think that above all else, clarity is king. If the viewer or the listener doesn't understand what it is you're talking about, then all the flash and all the gadgets and all the other clever stuff that you come up with doesn't matter, because they don't understand it. Then what's the point? When it comes to formatting, time often comes up in terms of, well, how long should it be? My rule of thumb is always, it should be exactly as long as is necessary to tell a great story and leave the viewer or the listener with absolutely no questions at the end of your story, and no longer. Each individual station is going to have, their guide for what they're hoping for, and sometimes you may be longer than that. And I'm of the opinion that it's okay to be a little bit longer, as long as every second that you're going to add to the normal amount of time is riveting television or riveting radio. Because every time you ask for more time and then deliver something that is great TV, the next time you ask, they're going to be like, okay, when he wants more time, it usually works out really well. And I think that's really important. On the flip side, I don't think there's anything wrong with coming back and saying, I know you guys want 1:30 on this package, but you know what? The elements that I have are best told in 50 seconds today. I can fully tell this story, and with the elements I have, I only think I can hold the viewer's attention for 50 seconds. I think that's what it should be. And in healthy newsrooms, I think that's okay to say, okay, today that's cool, and I'm going to find 40 seconds on another story, so that I'm not wasting the viewer's time with 40 seconds that you can't deliver really good television on.
Now, speaking of time, when I was in smaller stations, or even talking to other journalists in smaller stations, and producers, sometimes you allow some of the reporters to go ahead and have a 2-minute, 2.5-minute, 3-minute, because you're trying to fill time. So again, that leaves some journalists a little, I don't know if confusion is the right word, but just unsure of how long a package should be, especially if they want to move up to a bigger market. Because if you're used to doing, longer packages, that might become a crutch, right? So what's your advice on that? Do you have any advice on that at all?
I have to say, I rarely turned in a short package. I just had like some issues, I guess. I always felt like my stories were like, so that's probably terrible. But I think, and then I moved to like a long form station where I like did like 6 and 7-minute packages. I just went from like bad to worse. It was just like a bad thing. But I don't know. I think I agree with Jeff totally. Sometimes some people write long. Some people like really long sound bites. And some of the sound bites are worth it, and some of them aren't. Some people are long writers. Some people are long. They're just. We had people in some of the longer in the newsrooms that where I worked. They just, some of their stuff, they were just long winded, and they'd been in the business for a while, and that was just their style. And in some markets where people like that style, it worked. But in markets where they don't like that style, if you go to different places, like in New York, I listen to different things. In Boston, I listen to different things. Things are quicker. So it depends on the market. It really does. I mean, I see things that clip along in certain places, but when I worked in Louisiana, some of the things were kind of just laid back and just kind of just mosey along, But it just depends. It really, really depends. I mean, for me, some of the pieces I did in Louisiana, I would never have gotten away with in some of the other markets I worked in. But I mean, I added music, and my photographers would add like really long nat beds and things, and I would just be like, oh my gosh, that's a long nat bed. But then when I listened to it, and everyone would be like, oh my gosh, I love that, and I would just be like, oh. But I mean, it just depends. I mean, I think a lot of it really depends on where you are and your audience, and all of that really plays a lot into it. So all that to say, audience matters. Your listener matters, your viewers matter, and you have to be really in tune with that, and your news director matters, and your EP matters. So all that kind of stuff kind of matters, and your markets matter. So yeah,
I think it's important to look at the viewer as the customer. They're the people that you're trying to sell. You're trying to sell them on the idea that you can be their information source. And one of the really important things is to realize we are serving the customer. And I think it's important to think like the customer when I'm working on my stories. Okay, if I'm the viewer, am I going to care about this part of the story? Is it really necessary to understand what's really happening here to know all these things? And one of the toughest things about being a reporter is learning something new from a story and then realizing I don't need to tell people about it, but I know it. Well, that's fine, but the viewer doesn't really need to know it. And they're going to think I don't care about that when I hear it. So part of the reporting process is excising all of the things that don't really matter to the viewer if you're really thinking about it, if you're thinking like the customer, to take all those things out and truly serve them. And you said something earlier about, oh, I'd put in a longer package just to fill a show. That's not looking out for the viewer. In fact, that's not serving the customer at all. That's basically disrespecting the customer in some way, insulting the customer to say, I didn't really care about your time. I cared about filling my time and completing my job, but the quality wasn't important to me. And in a fight to try to keep the industry alive and keep eyeballs, that's not a winning formula. That's not a recipe that's going to keep us around. We have to serve the viewer, and that means respecting their time.
Now, can you both, Natasha, you mentioned talking about you want something that's very kind of catches your attention if you are to use a soundbite. Can you give an example? As you, Jeff, you just mentioned, I kind of lost my train. I'm trying to remember what you were talking about.
starting with a soundbite. You're talking about
Yeah, but Jeff, you had just mentioned something, and I wish I would have wrote it down. I thought I was going to remember, but I don't. Just go ahead and answer that first, and then I'll come back to you, Jeff, on finding an example of what you mean. When you were talking about formatting, like, and starting, like how you start a package. Sometimes you start with a soundbite. So I just want an example. If you could give an example of that.
Okay, well, like if someone is, you're on the scene of a fire, and someone is just, they've come out of the fire, and that they've lost someone, or they're looking for someone, and I'm trying to find my child, and they're screaming, and they're upset, and you've caught them in this emotional moment, and it's terrible. You're trying not to kind of invade their personal moment, but you've caught them at that time. And sometimes that's what, that heart-wrenching moment, you caught that, and that's something you open up a package with, and that's sometimes like a headline. That'll be a headline. That'll also be the opening part of your package. This mother is caught with emotion as she tries to find her child. And then maybe you open up with the whole, she did find her child. The good news is she did find her child and he's okay, or she's okay. As this fire broke out, on the west side, a mother is now reunited with her child, and that catches someone's attention. This mother thought, she might have lost her son, but we now know he's safe. Just moments ago, they've been reunited. That's the kind of stuff that's really impactful. It's catching people, and you'll see it all across the news, that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of thing that really catches your attention. It's impactful, and and you'll see it all across the newscast. It'll be at 5:36. That's the kind of stuff you see, and it'll really catch your attention. Everybody can put themselves in that woman's place. She thought she'd lost her child. This fire broke out. And everybody's worried. Oh my gosh, what if that happened to us? That's the kind of stuff that catches your attention.
And
when you watch,
I'll make you watch or continue to listen.
Make you watch or make you listen. Exactly.
Right. And so, can you, Jeff, kind of, how you were talking about, like, you could do 1 minute or 2 minutes if you need it. Can you kind of just give an example or try to explain a little bit, elaborate a little bit on an example of what would be an element you don't need to add? You know what I mean? Like, maybe talk about a story, and if you'd only needed a minute and 15, or you would want a little bit more time, just to kind of give new journalists an idea, because something more tangible, more. If
Sure.
you can.
We cover a lot of crime in this business. A lot of the minutia of crime is irrelevant to our viewers. If it's not happening in their neighborhood, it's basically voyeuristic, and we do such a poor job of adding context anyway to crime stories that a lot of it is just saying things to sort of justify our presence in being there. I'll give you an example, and I did not think it reflected very well on our business, but at my old station down in Fort Myers, we had a drowning that had happened. A young child had drowned. And I'm always leery to begin with about covering these stories, particularly to the extent that we cover them, because it does feel very voyeuristic rather than newsworthy. And on that particular day, our reporter, a great young reporter, was doing a live shot and said during the live shot, "I just saw a car coming to the driveway of the house, and we believe that was the family," or something to that effect. And I thought to myself, we just spent 10 seconds talking about something that was very voyeuristic, not relevant to our viewers. And if I was a viewer, it wouldn't leave me feeling informed. It would leave me cringing, thinking, we are invading these people in the midst of tragedy. That's not relevant to me. I didn't need to know that. And that goes back not only to serving the viewer by excising what doesn't matter to them, but also looking at what we do through the prism of how is the viewer looking at us? And we should always position ourselves as people that are informing our viewers and serving our viewers and trying to look out for our viewers. And a lot of times we're kind of missing that mark, and we've got to be thinking about that. And I think at its surface, just trying to be an advocate for our viewers' time by taking some things out that aren't relevant to them is a good start.
Oh, so the example I was going to ask is, you know how you mentioned that you have your package together and all of a sudden you have additional information. Should I put it in? Should I not? That was what I was going to ask. If you could give an example of that.
It just depends on if you feel like it needs to be added for an understanding of this story that fully gives the context of the story.
Okay. Now, this is one question that gets asked so many times, because one of the main duties that we have as journalists, whether it's print, television, or radio, is pitching a story, finding a story. How do you find your stories?
Lots of reading. I mean, basically, we read a lot. We're constantly, reading different materials. We're constantly talking to people. We're constantly, talking to our friends, talking to our relatives. I mean, a lot of people are telling me stuff. I mean, people just come up to me all the time in the grocery store. I mean, I get a lot of stories just with people saying, "Hey, did you hear about that situation that happened down there on Marathon? This man did so and so." And I'm like, "What? Did you know that he blah blah blah?" And I'm like, "Really? Well, did you know?" And so that it's like something that I'm like, "Huh?" And did you know that he last year, that's the same thing that happened? And then you're like, "Really?" And that turns into a story. I mean, you'd be amazed at like these little situations that are like, they think is like, well, yeah, because I remember last year when that happened. And then you make these connections and you're like, that did happen. And I remember, and that's where that little girl happened. And, you tie all these things together. And before you know it, it's like a connection to this and that. And it's a story. I mean, all kinds of ways. I mean, people connect this and that. And remember the story that we did, last time, and that connected this. It's amazing. I mean, things just kind of like come back from, a year ago. And then this person calls you and say, remember, a couple years ago, you did this story on this. Well, this lady moved down the street, and it's amazing. I mean, things just come back from a long time ago. And then other people just reach out to you and say, we've had this situation in our neighborhood. No one's come out here and, and talk to us about it, but it's been a problem for a while. People reach out to you. I mean, we get stories all kinds of ways. And then sometimes you stumble on stuff.
And just
sure
1
Jeff
minute.
feels the same way.
Yeah, just 1 sec before you. To the participants who are there, if you have any questions, as you think of them, just go ahead and put it in the queue. And at the end, we'll have a few minutes for the Q&A so I could read them. Like I forgot, you know what I mean? You think you're going to remember the question, but just go ahead and type it in the Q&A and just put your name in front of it. And if you're a student, what university you go to, if you are a working journalist, what your title is, if you're MJ anchor, digital reporter, and what station you're at, and then go ahead and ask your question. So if you can just go ahead and do that as you think of them, as I stated towards the end, we'll have like a little Q&A. So if you want to go ahead and build on that,
don't be shy. Answer those questions.
Yeah, we have a small group. Like I said, we're just starting, so you get to ask a lot of questions. So go ahead and feel free to do that. So go ahead, Jeff.
I would say that you find story ideas anywhere and everywhere that you can look. I think Natasha is exactly right. That the best way to find story ideas is to talk to people. When I was a full-time reporter, I would create a Rolodex in every market that I worked in. So everybody I talked to, I'd try to get their phone number and their email. And then I was keeping a full Rolodex of everybody that I knew. And
they don't know what a Rolodex is, Jeff.
Okay, a Rolodex is just a list of all the people that you know. I would put what their title was, what their field of interest was, phone number and email. So whenever there was a story about a plane crash, okay, who are my aviation experts? I've got my list here, and then I can get in touch with them. Or I'm just talking to people that I know things. And even if I'm just hunting for story ideas, I wanted to talk to the people who knew things in my community. And I think the key to that is that doesn't just mean the media relations person. That doesn't just mean the PR person. In fact, those are the people you don't really need to be talking to about story ideas, because they're going to send you their story ideas anyway. The people that you want to talk to are the ones who know things and maybe are the thorn in the side of some people. And you want to hear, from them as well. And the other thing I would just say is be ready to ask why. Be ready to ask why about everything, because the community is almost relying on us to be skeptical of everything. And we haven't done a very good job recently compared to in the past of being skeptical. And part of that stems from how much news we have to put on television. So now we're a little bit more quick to just accept and put it on TV or put it on the radio because we've got to get it on TV. And that's not really our role fully. Our role is to be what's referred to as the fourth estate, to try to hold the powerful accountable and say, why? Prove it to me. Explain it to me, justify it to me, justify it to our viewers. And there is nothing wrong with saying why. And that's where a lot of great story ideas come from just saying why.
Okay. And just to clarify, yes, Rolodex is kind of archaic now. So maybe have a Excel spreadsheet would be
Yes.
maybe like the more.
Well, that's what mine was. It wasn't actually one of the little things with the cards on there and the rolly thing. It was just a document, but still, I'd call it my Rolodex, and I'd print it out.
Just like have like a zillion numbers in your phone now. You just put like airport guy or like, guy from the city department, or whatever now.
Sure.
Like I have like 3,000 numbers in my phone now.
So speaking of story ideas, again, I'm part of a lot of different groups, and I see another kind of frustration for newer journalists is that they feel every time I pitch, they never take it. They never, my news director doesn't want to that. My assignment desk, they don't want the story. So can you kind of talk about maybe, is there a particular way to pitch a story? Is there a way to pitch it so that they will say yes? Are
Yeah.
there certain, should you have certain things in place before you even pitch a story?
Pitch the tease. That's the secret. Pitch how they're going to tease the story, because the people who have to say yes are your producers and the bosses. And both of them, the key to their show is the tease. It's what they can put in the commercials that entice people to watch. It's what they can put in their headlines to entice people to watch. It's what they can put at the end of the break to entice people to come back. And all of it translates into ratings, which is how we make our money. Teases are so incredibly important. And I never understood that when I was a reporter. I didn't really get why it mattered. I was like, they're going to come and watch my story because it's me. Well, it's not true. They need a reason to watch. And then teases are incredibly important. And that's what they thrive on. So I learned if I could pitch the tease and they were excited about the idea of how they could tease that story, I was far more likely to get the go ahead on a story.
Can you give an example of a tease of what you mean? Because again, you said as a reporter, you didn't really understand. So let's say there was a bear, a 400-pound bear that walked into well, no, I don't even think you need a tease. That's a story. But just kind of give an example, maybe a short little synopsis of a story, and then how you would pitch it, maybe how you would not pitch. Because like I said, I see this all the time. They're so frustrated because their pitches never get picked up.
Sure. I'll give you an example from today of a story that we teased. There is a drug shortage involving cancer drugs. It's a very important story. And the hook today was that Congress had some people in and some experts testified and said this is now a life or death issue for a lot of people. But the tease is, why are doctors telling patients you have to wait for treatment now, or I can't give you the full dose of what you need, or you're not going to get the best stuff to try to make you better? Why is that happening? That's the tease. And now I want to know. And if you start there and say, this is the story, the way that you can tease this story today. There are doctors telling people you can't have the best treatment right now, or we're going to wait for it. That's going to get people's attention. And now they can already see it in their mind and in their show that they can do that. And then you just do the job of the reporter of telling that story, but they've already got their built-in piece.
Yeah, that actually, that was really good. Because when you first mentioned, over there in the Senate and this and that, you're like, but once you said shortage, you might have to wait. You're like, well, what if this person needs it now and they're going to die? It kind of brings more of a sense of urgency. What about you, Natasha, when it comes to pitching and what can
pitching,
perhaps?
I totally agree. I think if you sell the producer, if you get in the producer's ear, you almost have it. It's like Jeff said, if you're friends with the producer and you can kind of sell them, you almost have it. Because it's like what I found is like when I became friends with the producer, if they like the idea, you kind of almost have them in the bag, and it's like you said, the teasable thing. That's what I found. Like, if stories lack good video, Like you could have the best story in the world, but if you don't have the video element of it, it's almost like, they want to fight you. It's like you can have this great story, but if they can't see the video, where they can have good teases, they can have like, deep teases, they can kind of like tease it across the show. They're kind of like, well, it's a good story, but I mean, how are we going to tease it? What are we going to do? What are we going to use for video? How are we going to showcase it? They always talk about how are we going to showcase it? So that's the problem. So yeah, I totally agree with Jeff. I mean, it's just that pitching these stories, you have to go to the table like ready to tell them how you're going to showcase it. If you can tell them how you're going to showcase it, you can come up with a way. Well, yeah, I talked to this lady, and she's going to send us some video. She's already told me that she has video of this, she's going to send us some video of this, how this is going to work, then you're good. But if you go to them and you don't have the idea of how you're going to showcase it, you're going to have a hard time selling it. If it's not a story that's like already out there, that's just the key.
What about radio or print? Because you don't have video, right?
Oh, I mean, well, for radio, that's a whole nother ball game. I mean, I don't have to worry about teasing my radio stories because I'm just an anchor. So, I just kind of get my stuff and kind of roll with it. My voice is selling it. So that's a whole different ball game. But I mean, print, I don't do that. So that's somebody else's problem.
Right.
But yeah.
I've done print, so I think it is like what you said. I mean, you just gave a really good example, Jeff, and I think that can apply to all three. For anybody who's, watching this webinar, they can apply that in any of them. You mentioned radio. I've done print. I can see that as well. Yeah, you both make a very valid point on that. Like I said, it's a frustration.
Probably be like the pictures. It would be the pictures, right? The pictures are probably selling for print, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what kind of photo?
Picture can tell the pictures tell 1,000 words, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Pulitzer Prize winning pictures.
Yeah. Also, how can you determine a story as newsworthy? And a lot of times there's a national story and you want to localize it. So how do you make a story newsworthy, and how would you localize a story?
Well, a newsworthy story, how many people does it affect? Does it affect people in our community? Is it impacting people? I always make the case, I'm in Dayton, Ohio. So we always made the case that, it's always affecting someone in Dayton. I mean, there'd be like a plane crash that happened in Germany. There'd be a person in Dayton that it affected. It's like, it seems like there's always this feel like that it touches somebody here. Maybe because we have this Air Force base here and they're like people that, come from around the world. We have this big military, installation here. And maybe that's the connection. But it always seemed like there was some connection to Dayton. I mean, it could be a story that's international, that's like far away from here. It could be something, but there's always a Dayton connection. And so we're always like, the first thing we'd say is like, there has to be a Dayton connection. Let's look for that Dayton connection. How do we get, what is it? There has to be a person that's connected to Dayton. Do they have a son or daughter? Is there something that brings it here? How can we bring it home? What about that story makes it touch this community? And that's how you localize it.
And for you, Jeff?
I think that's true. I think you have to figure out, does this national story impact the people in my community specifically? Or is there something in my community that has a link to what's happening nationally? We always joke in Florida, there's always a Florida connection. And it's usually the craziest one possible. But yeah, you have to figure out what the connection is to your community, and go from there. I will give you an example that we are prepared for if former President Jimmy Carter passes away, that we've got some of our coverage ready to go. That's a national story about a man who, is from Georgia, and there isn't a obvious connection to, the Tampa Bay area, but I was able to interview a man who worked for the Secret Service and worked with Jimmy Carter quite a bit when he was based in Georgia, on his Secret Service detail, and, now lives in Tampa Bay. So there's a connection there. This is somebody in my community now who can offer some insight into this national story. And, that story is now ready to go. And it's a local story connected to a national story that I think is a decent example of what we're talking about.
And
So
we
it
do the
would be,
same thing.
go
And we
ahead.
do the same thing. We have a local person who got to meet Jimmy Carter. And, we do the same exact thing. He got to meet him. He got to have him autograph a bunch of stuff. And like, it's basically connected to like Habitat for Humanity. And so that we got to interview that guy. And that guy had this whole story about like how he got to meet with Rosalind Carter, and like his connection, how nice she was, and just how down to earth the two of them were. And so that's that local connection, just how those folks basically, impacted the people in this community. And that's that local connection that makes it like the Dayton feel of these national figures, that are a part of our community.
So it would be, if it was in a newscast, they would probably mention, let's just say Rosalind, because we don't want to. So let's say Rosalind, and let's say you guys had connections to Rosalind Carter. So maybe a headline, because that was pretty much a big headline. So they would have that, and then they would say, then you would go to local to have that connection, correct?
Yeah. So when last week, that was the story, local guy, had met Rosalind Carter and, met her husband and the whole thing. And when they came here for the Habitat for Humanity build, and, how generous they were and kind, and actually sat down and ate a meal with them, just like it was just, they were just regular people. So that was the local connection story. So, yeah. And that will be played again, unfortunately, when that happens again. So that was the local connection. Yeah.
I was blessed to meet her actually, and she was really kind. She was kind of like his gatekeeper because she
Yeah.
got everybody, because I wanted to meet him too, but she just was very strategic and just slowly moved us away from him. And then all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, where'd he go?
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's pretty cool. It's pretty
She handled
cool.
her business now.
She
And she
did.
was very cool about it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
The perks of being, a journalist, right? So what would you say? It's we have about 10 minutes left in this webinar. So I'm going to ask one more question. Then again, to the attendees, please, any questions? I actually have the window open right now. If you have any questions, please put them up. So I'll ask you this question. I do have a question from somebody who couldn't make it. So I'll ask you that afterwards, and then I'll open it up for the attendees if they have anything.
Jeff, I have a
So
question for you. So we have a Dayton connection to Tampa Bay. Speaking of crazies, Trevor Pettiford.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a Dayton connection to Speaking of Crazies. So there's that connection. Make sure you tell him I said hi.
He's a reporter at our station. Very
Yeah.
nice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was
Trevor,
like,
he's a very good friend of mine. Yeah, so make sure you tell him I said hi.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
okay. Actually, that kind of, you saying that made me think of another thing journalists should think about, and just correct me if I'm wrong. It doesn't have to be a national story that you have a connection. It could be a story you read in California and you see that there's a connection. I did a story when I was in Wilmington where there's this guy who rode across the country to raise awareness of suicide amongst veterans. And he was getting ashes from somebody in Minnesota. And because of his story got attention, somebody else in California. And so I let them know, hey, there's a connection. So that's just something, to kind of think of. It's not just national. But again, for new journalists, just to help them kind of relate, because we were all newbies, right? Could be reporters. Well, what were your biggest challenges when it comes to telling a story?
I think my biggest challenge was getting comfortable with myself. I'm uniquely weird in this business in that whenever you ask people, oh, why do you like this business? Most everybody will tell you, I love talking to people. I love going out and hearing people's stories and interacting with people. It's not me. The part of
Really?
this, the part that I love is the writing part. I
Oh,
like I've gathered the elements together, and then I'm gonna put together the story. And to me, that's a puzzle. And I love the puzzle of how can I put this story together and write it. The interaction part is tougher for me because it's not my personality. I'm more introverted by nature. And I chose a weird field, to be honest, given that. But I do love the writing part. So for me, it was just getting comfortable enough in my own skin to force myself to interact with as many people as I could so I could find decent story ideas and kind of get over the shyness hurdle and that sort of thing, or maybe feeling like I was even bothering people by asking. I know it's a strange answer, but that's the honest answer. That was the biggest hurdle for me, was kind of getting comfortable in my own skin enough to just you know be a conversationalist.
No, I appreciate you being, honest, and there has to be other people that probably run into that, and maybe what you just said will make them feel more comfortable because you're right. I mean, me, it's because I like talking to people, which might be obvious. But yeah, I've never actually heard what you just said, Jeff. So thank you for sharing that. And what about you, Natasha? What were your biggest challenges? Like starting off your first market or first job as a professional journalist.
oh yeah, I'm real shy. Yeah, that's me. No, yeah, no, no, it
I was like,
wasn't.
I don't believe you.
No, no, no. It's not a shy thing for me either. Let me see. Let's see. No, maybe I think that the thing for me, I didn't like the kind of knocking on door things like in for the invasiveness of like when people just lost somebody. I don't like that part. I really don't like that part. I really felt like we did a lot. I work for a station. The station here was really big on, if someone passed away, you got to get that mother, you got to get that person, and we're really really big on that. And I just felt like we were always in the face of someone as soon as someone died, and it just took me the longest time to just wrap my mind around why it was necessary to be asking that question. How do you feel? That just, it just didn't seem right, to try to talk to that crying mother or that crying father. And it just, for the longest time, it just didn't seem. And then as I grew as a reporter, I just decided that if I was going to tell this story, I had to tell the story in a way that was very empathetic. And I had to definitely um, be that person that feel what I felt. And I often found myself crying in these stories. And if I would felt like crying, I cried. If I felt that I just became a part of the story. And I it wasn't what I wanted to do, but if I said, if I was sitting there and it was just, so it was tough. It was very tough. I learned later to compartmentalize a lot better, but sometimes it was just awful. It was just
We're
awful.
human. We're
Yeah,
human.
you're on these stories and you're minutes into it and you're on somebody's doorstep and they lost a loved one and you're a mess. And it's just, that was hard. Very, very hard. So
Okay. And again, we have till 4:15. I did put a little bit more time, or I'm sorry, 5:15. But I do have a question from Annie Dance. She is an independent digital journalist, and she's covering cops and Congress in Western North Carolina. And so her question is, what's the best way, and how do you balance objectivity and subjectivity when it comes to telling a story?
fair and balanced, being fair and balanced. I
But
mean,
what's the best way is what she's asking. What's the best way to do that?
you tell the story. You just don't get in the way. I mean, you basically, what you see is what you tell. I mean, you don't interject yourself. What you see is what you tell. I mean, we're not supposed to have opinions on journalism. We present what we see. I know a lot of You watch a lot of commentators. We're not commentators. We're journalists. We are supposed to present what we see. You see a lot of Fox commentators and MSNBC, and I think we get confused as we see these cable news networks as to what they do. That's not what we do. We're local television, and we're supposed to present what we see. That's what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to interject ourselves. We're supposed to present what we see, and that's it. We're not supposed to have an opinion. We present what we see and get out of the way.
And what would you say was fair and balanced, Jeff? Especially the type of journalism she's doing. She's doing Congress and cops. So how would you make a story balanced, for example?
I think you need to take a step back, understand that you have opinions. People are going to have normal, instinctual opinions on a story, but take a step back, recognize what it is, and then pull back from it. I think you have to make sure you're taking the time to fully understand the arguments from everybody who is involved in these stories. What is their reasoning behind it, and seek to understand that and present those things to your viewers so they too can understand what the debate is about. But I think it's important that we play a role in these things as well that is twofold. Number one, I always say that my job is not to interject my opinion into the debate, but my job is to make sure that the debate is seated in fact. And if either side is saying something that is not factual as they try to make their argument, it is our responsibility and our role to say so. And it's not taking sides. My side is the truth. And if there's an objective fact that is being misaligned or misconstrued, to misinform, then I'm going to say something. I also think that there's a difference between an argument over tax policy or, what we're going to do. Where should abortion policy be? Those are policy issues. But if this is a metaphor, but I think it explains it pretty well. If one side says that it's pouring outside and the other side says that it's sunny outside, it is not enough for us to just go on TV or go on the radio and say, one side says it's pouring outside and one side says it's sunny outside. We got to get ourselves to the window and figure out if it's raining. We have that responsibility. And, straddling this fence is fine if you're presenting both arguments of a subjective argument, but you still need to fulfill your journalistic role of figuring out what the facts are and presenting those. And that's key.
Your mic is off, Natasha. And the other question, hopefully that answers your question, Annie. So another question that I was asked to, because she couldn't make it, she's actually was live, I believe, at 4:00. She's in a small market in Pennsylvania, and she covers 14 counties. So she was trying to figure out how to tell a story that will cater to all 14 counties. Me personally, I don't think you can do that, but what's your advice for her? Should you maybe focus on 3 counties that maybe are impacted by whatever story you're doing, or how would you go about that?
Well, we covered 14 counties in in this particular market that I'm in. That was our reach. I mean, our market, that's our reach, but it's generally the news applied to this region. But as far as a story that pertain to them specifically, I'm not sure how that works. They possibly cared about the story. They probably care about what's happening in this region. That's a regional reach, because you care about what happens in your region. Now, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure how that works. I mean, the stories that she's probably doing that's a region that they probably care about that particular region.
So
And
do you
the
think
story,
maybe she should look at it differently instead of looking at it like I want this story. You know how you'll have a national story and make it local? She's trying to make like a regional story, making a
it's,
local story regional to that area.
I think her story, if she's covering a 14 county area, it's probably going to be more regional than it's going to be local, is what I'm thinking. Because to localize it, it would be difficult at best. It'd be difficult because I mean it'd be regional, yes, because regional is the area she's covering. Because obviously she's covering that 14 county area. That's a region that she's covering. But to localize it would be very difficult in my estimation.
And what do you think?
We cover 14 counties, and that's pretty much the region that we cover. But that would be difficult.
Yeah, and what do you think, Jeff? Do you think maybe she needs to think of it differently?
I think she should recognize that you can't be everything to everyone. And people will understand, viewers will understand. If this one doesn't affect me, well, I'm happy for the people that it does affect because they're being informed. And the next time one affects me and not them, they'll be covering me too. I think don't try to break off more than you can chew. You know, it's okay. Just cover the news and inform. And you know, it's not gonna reach everybody. It's just not, and that's okay.
Okay. And so we are coming to an end. So in
Or a
maybe
couple of
5 minutes.
questions. Yeah,
Oh, you see some more? I don't see any more.
I do. There's a couple in there. So
Oh,
one of
okay, let
them,
me go down.
I don't
Oh, I see
know.
it. I see it. Okay. So from
Okay, good.
Tatiana, she said, how do you handle silence within a story? Do you make it part of your story, especially if it's a human interest? Yeah. Keep in mind it's 5:05. We have till 5:15.
Sure. If silence is going to tell the viewer something, yes, absolutely. Um, if if somebody becomes emotional during an interview and you think conveying the fact that they became emotional and stopped talking for 7 seconds is going to inform the viewer about the story, then yes, I think it's important. I would also say that if I was doing an interview with a government official and I asked them a tough question and they're searching for an answer, that silence tells me something too, and I'm putting it in there. Um, and I also think that we shouldn't be afraid of silence. I think particularly when we are young in this business, we fear silence because we're afraid that if we stop talking for just a second, the train's going to go off the tracks. And I would just stress to anybody who's young in this business, don't be afraid of silence. It's normal in conversational patterns. We think about what we're going to say. And I mentioned the viewer's attention span is short, but it's not so short that if you pause for a brief second, you know, they're going to flip out and change the channel. That's not going to happen. There's a guy that I listen to on the radio. He does an NFL show. He's a former NFL player. And I want to like his show. I do. But he never pauses. Every sentence runs together and he fills it all with the you knows and ums. And it's like he's typing and there's no space between the periods. And it's so hard to listen to. So hard to listen to. Don't be afraid of silence. It's okay.
It's
And
funny that you
and
say that because when I started, that's what I would do. I would cut out all of the natural pauses. And so it'd be do, 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 and it would make it shorter. But so what I was told, and I believe the expression or term in our field is to let it breathe. Just
Mm-hmm.
let it breathe.
Yeah.
And for you,
and
Natasha?
NPR has made that a science. NPR like lets it just, some of the pauses they do are just so beautiful because it's just enough to kind of let you soak it in.
Okay. Hopefully that answered your question, Tatiana. And in about a minute each, which you guys are veterans, so you know what a minute is, go ahead and give us your final thoughts. Whoever wants to start first.
I'll go first. I'll go first. I think the industry is in a rough time right now. We are we're fighting for survival. We saw what happened with newspapers, and radio and TV could go that same way if we're not careful. And I think we need to focus on providing value to our customer, whether it's your viewer or your listener, providing value. And it comes in the way of information, and it comes in the way of storytelling. Engage the people who came to you for information. Be very clear, but be engaging and interesting, and use the techniques that you know as a way to reach them and give them information that they find valuable. And if we can do that, we will survive, because we're providing a valuable service that people want. And if we don't, it's going to be our own fault when our industry collapses like newspapers did.
And for you, Natasha?
I would just emphasize, be a good storyteller. Think about talking to a friend, telling them a good story, develop characters. Think about character development. Find yourself a Mary Jones and take that Mary Jones and let Mary Jones tell a story. Find your character, call her Mary Jones, and let Mary Jones tell a story. Basically, use her to tell a story on television or radio or newspaper, wherever you do your work. Let Mary Jones be your storyteller. And I'm telling you, if you use that Mary Jones theory, you'll find yourself a very happy journalist. Remember, the Mary Jones theory will work for you. That's all you have to do. I'm telling you, this has been a wonderful business for me. It's been a couple decades, and I still love good storytelling. I listen to journalists all over the country, and I still love it. It's been a wonderful business. And I think that if you just take your time and learn how to tell good stories, you'll love it too.
So the gist is, take your time with it. Give yourself a chance to kind of familiarize with storytelling. It's all about the viewers. That's who you're pleasing. It's not your story. It's their story. And I guess you build up confidence. So just be confident in yourself. You'll get better. Would you say that's a good wrap up?
Yeah.
I think trust yourself, be genuine, and find a story and tell a story. And I think the Mary Jones theory is a great way to go about it.
It's all about being a good writer. If you're a good writer, good writer is a key too. You have to be a good writer, and being that good writer, telling that story through Mary Jones is the key.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you guys are very busy and you made time for us. We really appreciate it. So thank you, Jeff Butera, and to Natasha Williams. And for everybody watching, we'll have more events. You can go on our SPJ NC chapter Facebook or Twitter, which is now X, which is so weird to say. But you can get our next events, and we'll try to get as many webinars up to make you a better journalist. So thank you so much for your time. You all have a good night.
It was fun.
Bye, guys.